Ahsoka Season 1 is finally over, and we now have 12 mainline Star Wars series to rank from worst to best. Some of this is animation, some of this is live action, none of this includes the Lego or Ewok stuff. But what we will be diving in today is truly those 12 mainline Star Wars series, but I definitely want to hear your guys' thoughts down below in the comment section, so please leave your ranking. As well as if you want to include other series that maybe I didn't include in here, that's okay. But for me, these are like the 12 mainline things. And it's going to be very interesting to see your guys' ranking because when it comes down to Star Wars, opinions are very much flying everywhere. Some people need to remember that opinions are subjective. And Ahsoka seems to be one of those series that, again, feels that fan fires. Some people love the series, some people hated the series. And that kind of goes for the rest of the shows we're going to talk about today because some people think they're boring, some people think they're awesome, some people are going to hate my ranking, and I might even hate yours, but that's okay because that's why we're fans. We love talking this stuff. So the Force is definitely with us today. So without further ado, let's get into this ranking. Coming down to my number 12 is Star Wars Resistance. Now, this is the only Star Wars show that I've never gone back and rewatched at all. I watched once, and I felt pretty satisfied from that. The animation isn't personally my favorite, but I find that the characters themselves are very entertaining. I think if this is an animated show that would have premiered when I was younger, I probably would have liked it a little bit more, but every time I've just kind of thought about the series, it takes a lot for me to even remember certain aspects of it. It's one of the few things that actually does take place during the sequel trilogy or right beforehand per se, but for me, it's just a very forgettable series that I don't have too many fond memories of, nor do I really ever care to revisit too often. Now, my number 11 is the Book of Boba Fett, probably the most disappointing series on here for me personally. Boba Fett has always been my favorite bounty hunter growing up until I met Cad Bane in the Clone Wars series, but I loved Boba Fett back in the day, and when they reintroduced him back in Mando Season 2, he was so badass. Temuera Morrison did an amazing job. And I really wanted this show to succeed. I wanted every little aspect of it, and it sadly just did not hit the mark for me, like, whatsoever. There's some great moments to it, like, in particular, and I think there's some great ideas. But in the end of the day, it feels like the show didn't really have an identity of what they wanted to do with Boba Fett. Some of the flashback stuff was actually quite intriguing, showing his life with the Tusken Raiders and actually getting to know the Tusken Raiders a little bit more than just Raiders. The show has to say about those natives to the land, and I truly loved it. But then when you go over to the other end of it and you have the present of what we're doing with Boba Fett and how he's making all these deals, and all of that just didn't really flesh out all too often, to the point where everything just feels rushed because you get an episode and a half without Boba Fett. It's Mando. And then Mando and Grogu's reunion is all within this series as well. Don't get me wrong, the Mandalorian episodes were incredible. Specifically, the first one, that's honestly probably one of the best Mandalorian things I've ever seen. But when it looks at to everything else, I was very disappointed by on a story level. There's aspects of this that, again, I could rewatch and enjoy and have fun with, and I'm in the camp that, like, everything Star Wars I can usually rewatch and enjoy for what it is, but this is one of those series that I don't have any aspirations for because of how broken it feels. On top of that, Cad Bane. Now, like I mentioned, I love Cad Bane. I hated how they handled him in this series. I think he looks awesome, but killing him off, or quote-unquote killing him off, or him getting defeated just didn't really make sense. And then, like, to the other motive, the fact that they didn't establish Cad Bane from the beginning, I think was, like, one of the worst choices that they ever could have done. Cad Bane should have been the main antagonist for the entirety of Book of Boba Fett. There's no ifs, ands, or buts on that. He just should have been the main antagonist from the start. And it should have just flowed in from there. Because that was a big part of this show as well, is that we didn't know who the main antagonist very much was. And it was just Boba Fett going here and here. And again, like the gangster flair, all that stuff, it could have worked. It just meandered way too much. And then the Vespa crew, don't even get me started on that. There's, again, interesting aspects, but stuff that just doesn't work. Like everything in this show was just weird choices on top of weird choices that I almost couldn't get behind. They introduced a lot of great ideas And seriously, some awesome characters. I love the continuation of Fennec and Boba Fett, and I think Tamora Morrison honestly does deserve better. I don't know if they give him a season 2, but I would love to see something else kind of come out of this, whether it's a Star Wars bounty hunter show, or maybe he's a part of it. There's so many different ideas you could do. Tamora Morrison did a fabulous job on this. Fennec is just still always a standout, but the story was absolutely broken for Book of Boba Fett, to say the least. Gets me down to my number 10, which is The Bad Batch. Now, for me, The Bad Batch has been a series that only continues to grow on me as I see it, and I think if Season 3 really hits it out of the park, then this will easily jump like 3 different levels in here. The first season, I thought, was great, to a certain degree. First 2 episodes, amazing. Last 2 episodes, incredible. The middling parts of it, I would have liked a little bit more of them doing actual exploration around the world. It was more just mission here, mission here, mission here. And while we got Commander Rex at one point, there wasn't enough depth, and I wish there was a little bit more depth to it all, specifically dealing with the clones during the start of the Empire's reign. So then you get into Season 2, which I thought was a step up overall. And I say that because you have Crosshairs, I think that's his name, the sniper dude. You have him separated from the rest of the group, and now he has to fare for himself. And there's a couple different episodes with him primarily that I thought were some of the strongest episodes of the entire show. And I was blown away. There's one where he has to help an injured clone all the way back to base. And it's easily the best thing they've ever done in this show. So these ideas are fantastic, but again, they're bogged down by certain very filler episodes. And I know Season 3 will probably have those, but I really hope it really pushes it forward within the momentum of what the story is, specifically because Season 3 will be the final one, and I think there's a lot of grand ideas that they want to explore on. And now, having Tech dead, it just adds a whole other layer to it all. So I really like Bad Batch. I really like the characters in the cast, and I like some of the missions they go on. But I think when they really have those story-focused moments on the characters just trying to survive, it really opens up like a whole other realm of ideas that I can't wait to see how they finish out in Season 3. Which now brings me over to my number 9, which is Star Wars Visions. Now, this is kind of the same thing with Bad Batch, since every episode is very much standalone-ish in their own way. It's very hard to rank Star Wars Visions. It really much just comes down to my enjoyment. While I do really like anime, and I love that Star Wars is touching into that, Season 2 for Star Wars Visions had a lot of different versions of animation, and it wasn't just strictly anime, and I liked what they kind of went for. I think Star Wars Visions for me maybe would have even been under Bad Batch if it wasn't for that. I like all the unique visions and the unique ideas. I just wish they doubled down and actually explored a couple of these a little bit more. I actually wish some of them were actually longer. I understand they're just short stories, but like primarily some of these just feel like they should be longer. But to say the least, Star Wars Visions is a great experiment into what the world of Star Wars could be. The Ronin himself, as you can see behind me, is one of my favorite things that they've ever like emphasized in this like whole Disney Lucasfilm era. And even some of the other aspects just kind of feel like a Studio Ghibli film or other little things like this. And I really think Star Wars Visions showcases that Star Wars could be all of this if they just expanded on it. And if I were Lucasfilm, I would take whatever the best critically acclaimed or like the fans loved so much and make those into actual series. Greenlight those into series. Those are easy Disney Plus things. Like, do they not see how big anime is? Like, you do these little short stories and it's like people flip the fuck out for it. But if you did an actual show, could you imagine how hyped people would be? I think it would work. Maybe I'm wrong. You let me know down below in the comment section. But Star Wars Visions is a great experiment. I think it works for what it is. I don't too often go back and rewatch the entire season, but there are select episodes where I'll go back and watch it and be like, yeah, this is the coolest thing ever. Down to my number 8, which is Kenobi. Kenobi! Now, this honestly kind of went back and forth with being lower on this list. And when I mentioned that I was super disappointed about Book of Boba Fett, part of me was very disappointed in Kenobi. But it's also really hard for me to like lower this on here because seeing Ian McGregor back as Obi-Wan Kenobi for me is like one of the grandest moments of my life. even if it's not in the best series. I think there's again, just like Book of Boba Fett, so many great ideas. But where Book of Boba Fett either should have had more episodes or more of these ideas fleshed out in multiple different seasons, Kenobi's biggest issue is it should have been a movie. There's zero reason for Kenobi to be a show. And if you haven't watched, there's a lot of fan edits out there of Kenobi as an actual movie. I watched one and it was phenomenal. Which maybe is why that was the reason that this is up higher, is because I got to watch that. So, the grand and greatest moments of Kenobi are top tier Star Wars stuff. I love how it, again, broke down a character, decharacterized him, and showed a lot of different elements for Obi-Wan Kenobi, while on top of giving us more exploration into the Inquisitors, which I think have always been some of the most interesting aspects. I would have liked a little bit more of that, because I think Reva, I think that's her name, I can't remember off the top of my head too much. She, for me, is a character that I think just needed more development. But then you have Darth Vader, because in the end of the day, it's between Kenobi, Darth Vader, and Darth Vader's kids. And this whole triangle, this whole parallel, I think when you come off Revenge of the Sith and you go and watch this, it adds that much needed depth. It adds so much nuance to a character that I think went through it after Revenge of the Sith. And to have that in between of A New Hope and Revenge of the Sith now, I think is very important for a character like Obi-Wan Kenobi, even if this absolutely should have been a movie instead of a show. Like, no doubt about it. So, with that said, Obi-Wan Kenobi, a good series. Disappointing in a lot of ways, but one that I would still go as far to say it's not trash, it's not bad, it's just a little broken, like I mentioned with the other one. Now we get into my number 7, which is actually the most surprising one on this list, and that is Tales of the Jedi. A lot of you guys may have not watched this yet, but I actually hope we get another season of this. I feel like there's a rumor or a confirmation out there that there might be a season 2, but this focuses on 2 different Jedis who went down 2 different paths, and gives us exploration into 2 characters. One that you'd be actually surprised to hear me say, Ahsoka, and then the other one's Count Dooku. Starting on the Ahsoka piece, I liked her episodes. I thought they were great in between, showing her birth very much, her parents, going into like one more training mission with Anakin, which I think that actually ties very nicely well with, of course, within the Ahsoka show. And then the third one being kind of that in-between Clone Wars and where we saw her in Rebels. And I didn't really fully love all that. I didn't feel like we needed it. And the reason I say this is because then I go and watch the Count Dooku stuff. And it is so needed material for a character that transcends. Like, the Clone Wars show is one of the coolest shows for me, because when you go back and watch the prequels now, you have so much added development to all of these characters. Kenobi, Skywalker, Padme, the clones themselves. I mean, there's so much in between stories in Clone Wars that it really fleshes out the world into such a manner, and it makes those movies better. In Tales of the Jedi, while again it's nice to see a little bit more of Ahsoka, it makes you understand Count Dooku more, which I think is the strongest aspect of this show. I was honestly blown away by what they did with Count Dooku in this show. And that's why it's so high up. Like, I wish the entire series focused on Count Dooku. I think that would have been the stronger aspect to do. But, again, I love what they decided as a creative team to do in this series. And I understand the parallels, but everything with Count Dooku, that is the reason this series is so high up. The Ahsoka stuff's not bad. Don't get me wrong. I'm selfish and I wanted more of Count Dooku. So, Tales of the Jedi, one of the biggest surprises. If you haven't watched it yet, you absolutely should. We'll get into my number 6, which some of you guys may have never watched this. I don't even know how people actually can watch this now without buying the DVDs, and that's Gendy Travasky's Clone Wars. You're probably like, who the frick is that? If you're younger, you might not know. He's done stuff like Dexter's Laboratory and things like that, and I might be mentioning that to the younger crowd who still doesn't know what that is. And the reason I included this is, one, it is not mainline, it is not canon no more, but I think it was a big establishment of my childhood, and I needed to include this very high, because Gendy Travolsky's Clone Wars is one of the most epic and badass things that I've ever watched. I probably try to watch a couple of the episodes at least once a year to just kind of get this vibe. It's a part of my childhood that I just vividly remember being so freaking awesome. General Grievous is like one of the biggest badasses in here. Ventress. The animation was just so stunning. I love the 2D stuff and the effects to it all, and like I think that's why I love Visions at times, because some of the animation is so anime-ish, and Gendy Travolsky's Clone Wars is very much Samurai Jack anime kind of look to it all. And while it's so over the top, it's a show that it actually has meaningful aspects. And if this was the prototype for what Clone Wars was supposed to be, there's a reason that I love this series so much, because it does again add depth to the point to where it was kind of canon at one point, in my eyes at least, and then we got the actual Clone Wars series, which only added much more depth to everything else and kind of wiped this one from existence. But if you haven't watched this one and you can find the DVDs, Volume 1 and 2, on eBay, you should go buy them, and you should watch them, and you should enjoy them, specifically if you are a Star Wars fan. If you've watched them, then you know and understand why they're so high on this list. Again, maybe I have rose-tinted glasses, maybe it's nostalgia. I loved this series so much, and I think everything about it was just badass, to say the least. Before we get to my top 5, guys, I just want to give you guys a reminder. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. If you love Star Wars content, or in general, you just love talking movies and TV, this is truly the right place for you guys. I cannot wait to keep talking movies and TV with you guys on a daily basis. So again, hit that like and subscribe button, leave your thoughts down below, and let's get further into this review. Because at my number 5, this one I know is probably going to be a lot higher for some of you, but you got to understand where I'm coming from, because I have some nostalgia for some of the other things coming up on this list. But at my number 5, it is Andor. Andor, I will go as far to say, I think is the best written Star Wars series, and honestly, arguably, one of the best written Star Wars things ever. On a script level, this is something that actually really took me by storm by how incredible Gilroy did with this. Like Andor, for me, it takes a character and an entire film, which is Rogue One, which I don't think is like the greatest thing. I like it, but I've never really loved it, and made a character that I didn't really care about, made me love him, made me understand him, and seeing how someone can get into the rebellion and seeing all the different sinister aspects of even the start of the rebellion. It's dark, and it's great, and it really feels like the spark. Like you saw when the spark started. And Season 2 can't come soon enough. Like, if Season 2 is just as good as Season 1, I'm pushing this up even higher on this list the next time we re-rank these. But I think Diego Luna is phenomenal in this. Stellan Skarsgård, I mean, gives one of the best speeches in the entire thing. The entire cast is phenomenal in this, but I really think it comes down to the scripts. And I love how they broke down the arcs, like how it's like the first 3, boom. Then you get to the 3rd episode of the next set, boom. And that entire heist, I still think is like one of the most gorgeous things I've ever seen in Star Wars. I love Andor, and I love very much everything going up on this list. My only reason it is lower is I did find the show to be a tad bit slow in pacing. That's it. Literally my only problem with the show. Now we get into my number 4, which is The Mandalorian. Now, if Season 3 was top tier content, I probably would have this at my number 2. Number 3, maybe even a little bit higher. But Season 3 was a little bit of a disappointment for me. I liked a lot of ideas in it. It just felt completely rushed. I have no idea what they were trying to do. So many different storylines, so many things just kind of didn't even get finished. I don't know what they were doing with Season 3. But if we talk about Season 1 and Season 2, it was exactly what I wanted this show to be. I love experiencing a Mandalorian who, getting to see his bounties, getting to see now he's taking care of a youngling, seeing how he crosses paths with so many different other people that we love in the Star Wars lore. And, you know, real fast about Season 3, I loved everything they did with Bo-Katan. I thought Katie Sackhoff was the absolute standout of that entire show, and I think is the best aspect of Season 3. And I think that just goes as far to say how much I love the Mandalorian culture. I love how much they dive into it. I love that they bring back characters. While it is cameo time, sometimes it is meant to be in the best way. The Luke Skywalker reveal is still one of my favorite things. The finale of Season 2 was epic. Season 1 was epic. Season 1 and 2 for me are like near perfect television for what they were trying to do. Season 3 was just a disappointment because of how great Season 1 and Season 2 were. So I put it up a little bit higher. Who cares? The score's epic. The action is always rocking. Pedro Pascal's voice just pours throughout The Mandalorian. I love Mando and Grogu's relationship. And I love how it's very much them just going throughout the universe, at least the first 2 seasons were, committing bounties, trying to find a home for this little guy. And for me, there's just so many grand ideas about that. I would get so happy, and when I go back and rewatch the first 2 seasons, I get so excited about it. Moff Gideon, freaking incredible villain. I don't know. I don't have too many deep ideas on this one. I just really enjoy Mandalorian to such a high extent, and I know a lot of you guys do as well. Now we get into my number 3, though, and that is Rebels. Star Wars Rebels, for me, is everything. This show only gets better over time, and I think it really comes down to its cast of characters and the way that it's, I think, what Dave Filoni was able to do with a lot of the lore. And when you think you're watching a filler episode and you get to later in the season, you're like, oh, that was not filler. That ties in directly, heavily to all this lore or this other character attribute that we just learned. And I think that's one thing that Rebels did better than Clone Wars, even though I have a lot of... Obviously, I haven't talked about Clone Wars yet, but I have a lot of nostalgia for Clone Wars. For me, Rebels is just that show that I thought was going to be the dumbest thing in the world, and it ended up being my favorite band of misfits. And I think it's more emotional now that this is higher up on my list than the last time I did it, mostly because of how well Ahsoka dissected some of these characters. And when I go back and rewatch Rebels every so often, and I get to the episode with Kanan sacrificing himself, it really is the culmination of how much I cared about every single person involved with this show, and how much I cared about these cast of characters. No matter what they were doing, no matter what mission they were going on, no matter what stupid thing they might be joking around about, I felt like a part of their crew. I felt a part of the Ghost crew. And I think when you look at a likable characters, the best group of characters that we've ever met in Star Wars was that original trilogy. Han, Leia, Luke, Chewbacca, R2-D2, C-3PO. That original group that every time you went back to them, you just always had a smile. And then you can throw Lando in there too. You know, the prequels tried having that. The Clone Wars obviously has part of that. But I really truly feel that Rebels has that cast of crew that we have liked the most since then. With Ezra, with Kanan, with Hera, with Chopper, with Zeb, with Sabine, and then even Ahsoka at times when she was a part of their crew. She wasn't fully a part, but that whole entire Ghost crew, for me, is everything in this world, in this story, and is the reason that Star Wars Rebels works. And then on top of that, you dive into more culture with the Inquisitors. You get to finish out Darth Maul's storyline in here. You get to bring Thrawn back into canon. I mean, there's so many great aspects of Rebels that it continues to make me excited as a Star Wars fan. Now we get into my number 2, which I almost wanted to put this up higher. I need to rewatch it. I'm going to be good, but I think this show for me was perfect. Depending on how a season 2 goes or how they continue the storylines, Ahsoka for me is... When I say everything in Star Wars, this was everything. As a point of blank, Star Wars is like my favorite franchise of all time, besides Toy Story. Like I mentioned, Ahsoka, and I've said this multiple times, Ahsoka is my favorite Star Wars character. So I went into the show with a lot of aspirations, and a lot of thoughts, and honestly a lot of worriness. Because how are you going to successfully give me more development for Ahsoka? How are you going to develop the Rebels crew? How are you going to bring back Thrawn? How are you going to do all of this in one season? And maybe they weren't going to be able to do one season, and they obviously did not. They established a lot of little not plot holes, but like loose ends that they obviously needed to tie up, like Baylan and Shin, which, rest in peace to Ray Stevenson. I thought he was absolutely phenomenal as Baylan, by the way. I was very sad to see that we didn't get more of him in the finale, but I truly think he was incredible throughout this all, and I'm so sad he will not be able to finish out Baylan's storyline, but whatever they do with that character next, it's so impressed because of what Ray Stevenson did. So I can't wait to see what they continue with that legacy of that character. And Shin, I thought, was a very interesting apprentice that I can't wait to see more of as well. But when we go back to the character of Ahsoka and the Rebels crew, they established and landed every little thing I needed them to do. We obviously saw Ahsoka a little bit in the Book of Boba Fett, but we definitely saw her first in Mando Season 2 when she was introduced in live action. And her introduction in there I thought was great. But then when we get to here, and you know, she feels this very standoffish, to kind of come to the reason of why she is. And to get those thematical levels, because this very much felt like a sci-fi samurai story. It, for me, struck every point and every layer of what I wanted this show to be. In moving her character along, moving her to that masterly level. Having her take on an apprentice of her own and understand what it means to be a Jedi. And to be and have an apprentice. She very much is a Ronin. But she's one that has grown and finally got her final lesson from her master. And seeing Anakin in the flashbacks in the World Between Worlds as a Force Ghost at the very end, I mean, I really thought the show was going to be cameo. And that was going to be my worry, that that's all they were going to focus on, bringing so many things in the live action, and it wasn't. Dave Filoni restricted himself and gave us fans exciting moments like zombies, witches, things from like the comics, the books, and cartoons, and even games that I never thought we'd ever see in like live action. I thought it'd be a little too weird, and I'm so happy they did it, because now we get to dissect with new fans who get to explore all these new elements, where us fans have already been a part of that. It's always been a part of Star Wars. And I love how they developed that. I love how they brought Thrawn back. I thought Thrawn, Lars Mikkelsen, was impeccable in here. Sabine in live action, just a perfect correlation. Very different than the character we originally saw, but then we understand where she comes from after the whole Mandalorian and all that stuff falling down. Ezra is better than I could have even imagined. I didn't even know how they were going to do Ezra, honestly. I was just kind of like... But Ezra's everything. Hera's great. Chopper is great. Jason, I loved seeing Kanan and Hera's son. There's so many aspects to this show that just reminded me of why I love being a Star Wars fan. And it's very much the entire embodiment of this. And Kevin Kiner's score is one of my favorite things, one of my favorite scores in Star Wars ever. Is there little grievances I could have? Sure. But I think all those grievances just come from the Lucasfilm era in general within Disney. I don't really care. This is the perfect Ahsoka show for me, and I'm so happy with how they realized it all. Now we get into my number one, and my number one is Star Wars The Clone Wars. This, for me, I've talked about it like numerous times throughout this ranking already. I have full nostalgia for this. The way that it adds on to my favorite era of Star Wars, which is the entire Clone Wars and the prequels. I understand it's messy in there, but this show really adds so much needed development for so many characters. Like I mentioned, how Rebels concluded Darth Maul's storyline, Clone Wars adds to that. It adds to Anakin, it adds to Obi-Wan Kenobi and his entire love life, and even the Mandalore culture with Bo-Katan and Satine. And if you want to even get more into that, it adds into Boba Fett's previous life. It adds into Cad Bane, introduces one of the baddest ass bounty hunters in the world. It brings in Ahsoka, and it shows a different side of Anakin that the movies never showed. And this is why Clone Wars is perfect. Even if it has so much dumb filler at times, which doesn't ever really correlate and go back to it, I still enjoy it because it's just more time with these characters. Specifically, most of the time, clones, which is a big aspect because it makes you care about the clones to the point that when you get to the final 4 episodes of Star Wars The Clone Wars, and it's correlating right alongside Revenge of the Sith, it is one of the most beautiful and poetic things. The Siege of Mandalore, the Order 66 moment between Ahsoka and Captain Rex, it for me is just all very powerful stuff that I find to just be impeccable and some of the most beautiful things I have ever seen in Star Wars. I think this show was about as perfect as could be, and as much as it has its issues, Clone Wars for me is just filled with nostalgia, awesome and epic lightsaber battles, incredible character development that only makes me appreciate the prequels more. And as much as people hate the sequel trilogy, I cannot express enough how much I hope one day they decide to do an animated show that takes place in between all the movies or something of that nature between Last Jedi and this, and even right afterwards where it leads into what Rey's doing now within the next film. Where it just gives us that added development, more time with these characters. Because in reality that's all I want. I just want more time with all these characters, and Clone Wars gave me exactly all of that and more, and that's going to be my Star Wars ranking, guys. Thank you so much for clicking on this. You guys are really all the best. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe, and if the Force is with you, you definitely are in the right place. Not more Star Wars content coming for the rest of the year, not too much unless you guys have ideas, but we definitely have a lot of content coming out on the daily basis. I love talking movies and TV like I've talked about. If you've followed me for a while, you know that I definitely post at least once a day, or at least try to, about something movie related. So guys, of course, until next time, may the Force be with us all.